Hello everybody, this is the clip series of basically the retrospective that we did over the weekend. For anybody that missed it, I'm chopping up all the individual segments and putting them all out on YouTube as the week goes on. This is the opening segment of the program, which was kind of the history of RetroDBZ, a little bit of Josh and I's back history. Josh tells some of his experiences, how retro helped him personally in life and then helped him later on in his career. It was really an outlet for him to kind of, after going through a real rough patch in his life, able to get back on his feet and get moving in the right path. And it's really great that he shared all those experiences with everybody. So I hope you enjoy it. Remember, we did all of this not only to celebrate the old Score game, but to bring awareness to a really great cause that affects a lot of us, and it's affected our gaming group in particular on Retro very hard over the last year. We lost 3 of our group members to suicide. They took their own lives. So for anybody who would like to, we'll discuss it a little bit in the video, but for anybody who would like to make a donation to the HBMO, we will post a donation link in the description below the video. So thank you. I don't want to hold you guys up anymore. I know you're excited to see this first segment, so we're going to roll right into it. Hello everybody. Welcome to the DBZ Virtual Retro-Spective. Today we're going to talk about the history of the RetroDBZ group, website, all that type of stuff. We are also going to talk about the history of the game, all different incarnations of it, and we're all here doing this for a really good cause. Our community has been hit pretty hard by suicide over the last year, and we have teamed up with another organization that I work with very closely called the Hunter Burton Memorial. And throughout the drive, we're going to be doing various things to kind of help them, donate some money, bring awareness to the cause. We're going to have some of their people on in a little bit to talk about what they do, because they specifically do outreach for suicide and awareness and prevention for gaming groups. So at times it'll be a little heavy, but for the most part it's going to be all DBZ for most of the night. So guys who are just now into the site over the last couple of years with PanZ, they probably know Josh because he manages the group, and you probably know me from one of my various DBZ projects but in the past. But if you don't know who we are, we're going to give you a quick brief history of how we ended up working on the DBZ card game, and I'll go ahead and start. Yeah. So I guess I'll start with me. I played in the championships and stuff like that. I was a big regional player in 2002, 2003, and went from there and was a Kid Buu playtester. And then after Kid Buu playtesting, I stuck around and worked on UU for a little while, and eventually transitioned into a full-time playtesting role at the company. And did that for a while, and then got offered a chance to work on the Inuyasha card game, which you can see I have some relics of it up there, and was the designer on that game for pretty much the entirety run of that game. Do you want to give a little brief how you came to Score?
Yeah, shoot, I had a more roundabout. So I started out as a player. I actually came on after the game was already done and we were doing ReZ. So I was starting out in the Washington, D.C. area, and I won the national championship, and I thought this was awesome, but my real prize, my real goal was to work for Funimation, because at the time I loved anime, I loved Dragon Ball Z, Yu Yu Hakusho, everything, and it's like, this is what I wanted to do for a living. So I was actually volunteering and working a lot with people over at Funimation at conventions. I started out with Score and was able to make the connection and jump over to the kind of Funimation side. And so after working with them for a while, they kind of offhandedly said, well, Josh, if you come to Texas, if you come to Dallas, we'll give you an internship and you can work in anime and life will be awesome. And I took them seriously, so I transferred schools. I came down to Texas to work for Funimation, and they were a little surprised that I did that. And yeah, it turned out there was not a internship ready for me. Some people kind of spoke a little out of turn with that, and I was like, well, great, now I'm in Texas. So I went to my first true love, Score Entertainment. I was like trying to get a job through them during my time in college. my roommate was a play tester for them. I knew a lot of people that were working there, but my studies were unfortunately number one. That's what I put more of my effort into. But I knew where they all hung out. Every Wednesday they would go have lunch at a local pizza place, and I just so happened to show up every Wednesday.
Josh was a fixture at our. A thing at Score was every Wednesday we'd go to this pizza place called Nietzsche's Pizza. It was real close to the college in town. The reason we went on Wednesdays, it was new comic book day. So we'd go buy our comic books and we'd go eat there. And Josh, just out of nowhere, he was there one week, and then the next week, and then the next week, and the next week, and eventually he was like, saw him at lunch, and then I saw him in the office, and then I was like, okay.
Yeah. So I talked with some of the marketing people, particularly Deanna Cass. I think we're going to hear from her later. And I actually got her to speak at my college campus, and eventually that led to a internship as this weird position that was kind of sort of play tester, but mostly marketing coordinator. And so I got in as a marketing coordinator over at Score for my final semester in college, and then right after graduation, that's where I was writing press releases and working on mostly Inuyasha, Bleach. Well, by that time, DBZ, we were just into RetroZ, and I think the only work I ever did on that was to write the press release saying, Score Entertainment sadly is no longer supporting the Dragon Ball Z TCG, and stuck with them until the bitter end. I was one of the last people to leave that.
Yeah, because you lasted longer than I did. I was hitting the first wave of like the 2008 economic crash, layoffs at the time. Mainly, I think, because we really only had Bleach in production, so they just needed the Bleach people, which I was involved with, but I wasn't the main guy behind. And then they needed the marketing people, which was you. So
yeah, I was able to hang on just a little longer because I was also starting to do work for Donruss. I actually wrote several trading card sets for a brand they had called Donruss Americana, which was their celebrity trading card set. And I was whole into the pop culture thing, very early social media, so it was a natural fit for me to start writing for those card sets. And honestly, that's probably one of the more important things that I did at Score Entertainment, because that's one of the things that I use most in my portfolio from that time. So I got to hang out a little bit longer, but really not much longer. I think it was only a handful of months.
Yeah, so that kind of brings us how he and I ended up at. Somebody's calling me in the middle of this. Okay, that kind of ends up how he and I got to working at Score, and we touched a little bit on how kind of ended at the end and whatnot. But after Score basically kind of went the way of the dinosaur, didn't exist after that point. I went back to college, and Score had pulled all their websites down. I think they had even done it while I was working there for anything that wasn't in production. So all the kind of like legacy Dragon Ball Z content, things like that. I think Epic Battles was down at that point, case closed, all those things. And a lot of that had to do with the licenses at the time. If we didn't have a license for something, it did not make sense to keep it up, or I don't think we could legally keep up the old imagery and stuff like that. So when it came time to like retro, I'm pretty sure it was around the time of Gen Con in 2008. I just was like, I need to have some of this stuff in existence for portfolio reasons. Like I'm not the only one who was affected by the 2008 economic crash amongst that group. So I was like, I'm going to create something for like archival purposes that we can all use to be like, these are the things that we worked on. Look, this is an example of the cards, these are the rules, things like that. So I created what was kind of like a real rudimentary site that was just a lot of the card imagery and stuff like that. And a couple of the older employees too, they caught on to it. I know Chippy wrote a big thing that we referred to as the anthologies about his time at Score that was quite popular and brought a lot of people to the site. And surprisingly to me, around kind of what was created as just an archival thing, this community built. We had a really rough message board back then at the time, and a lot of people came to that message board and were really happy to see and talk about Dragon Ball Z, especially that score stuff. Cause I think the Bandai game was what was out in the market at the place, not the new Bandai game, the old Bandai game. And a lot of people really gravitated towards that. And then we were going to Gen Con, and I would, bring decks with me and we'd randomly play, and we kind of just threw it off there, like, hey, why don't we just run a tournament for nostalgia's sake? And kind of the idea was that Kid Buu, while being probably the most developed and most play-tested set in all of ScoreZ, it never received like a real tournament season because it came out after the 2003 World Championships. And then by the time the next tournament season had started, the transition into GT had happened. So it was basically like Type 1, Type 2 at that time, and the rules had changed to the game. So there was never really a true Kid Buu playtesting environment out there in the tournaments. So I was like, let's just do one at Gen Con. We'll just do a tournament. You can print whatever cards you want off the internet. It makes no sense to make people have to buy new cards to play the game. Let's just do it for fun. So I signed up in the Gen Con guide. I asked for a table of 8, and I think it was $1 entry because that was the cost of one ticket, and that just to get listed in the guide, you had to pay, like everybody had to pay like $1 ticket. And I believe I reached out to Funimation at the time, and they gave me some DVDs to give out as prizes. And I'm sitting there expecting only like my brother and Josh and Joey and a couple of the other guys to show up and play, but I believe we ended up with like between 30 and 40 people at that tournament, which is pretty mind-boggling to me because I had to go and ask the tournament organizer, like, I need space. Like, we're gonna need to have all these people that want to play, and I don't want to turn them away. And luckily, really nothing was happening around us. And at that time, we always did our tournaments on like Friday at Gen Con, because we wanted people to be able to go play in, like, if they were going to play in one of the big Magic money tournaments or Versus or something, one of the other games going on. We didn't want this to be something that competed with those things. And after that first year, I mean, it was a big success. And then a lot of people we noticed were really starting to play the game. There were deck lists being posted online. And we saw like a little, like, kind of like the real Kid Buu environment starting to develop. And just to kind of keep things interesting, around that point, Josh and I started developing like just virtual cards, just things that we kind of wanted to see in the game. And that the idea was not to change like the environment or anything, but just add some things for flavor into the game that were never there. And then the following year, it just kept escalating. Like, I think the next year we had 50 or 60. And then the next year after that, we got to like 80. And then the final year we did it, I think we broke 100 in the tournament. And we were by far the largest fan group there for what I guess Gen Con considered the like out of print legacy games. Like, we were way ahead of everybody else. Like, it was pretty mind boggling. And just this huge community, like Facebook group showed up around that, and people started running their own events. Like, we were doing little Kai tournaments all over the country that other people were running, and it was a real grassroots, interesting thing at the time. So.
Yeah, leaving Score Entertainment, that was right when like Facebook started becoming open to the public. You didn't have to have a college account for it, and at first Score was just a profile page, but then they introduced like a group page, or pages now that you understand them as. And so I started one for DBZ while I was at Score. It was all in my name, and when I left Score, no one cared about it, no one wanted it, and I was like, well, I've got all these followers, I've got all these people interested in DBZ, might as well take it with me. And that's about the time when all this retro stuff started to happen. So I was at first a little standoffish for it, because I was like, yeah, I like DBZ, but I think the time in the game had kind of come and gone. I was really exhausted after all of the GT stuff, and finally, I had actually achieved my goal, and I was hired on by Funimation to come and run conventions for them. Essentially, what I was doing with Score Entertainment, and at first I thought that was a dream come true, but as it turned out, it turned out to be a very, very toxic environment while I was there. While I was there. Running the events, I kind of found out that there was this whole system where the current employees that were there were essentially using the conventions as doing like these free vacations for themselves, where they would bring out friends, and they would bring out girlfriends and mistresses, and they would say, oh, these are important workers that we would need for the booth, and we'd pay money to bring them out, put them in a hotel, pay them while they were there, but it turned out that they weren't actually working at the booth. I was the one that was working at the booth, and all my budget was going to pay for these people, and it was just me. And I was like, well, this has got to change. This has got to change. So I reached out to Garrett, and I'm just like, Garrett, I know you do events. You're going to work out for doing this. How would you feel if I pitched you to come to all these shows and work with me, and we can kind of do like DBZ panels while we're out there. They're doing it. So that kind of started our first foray into doing panels and kind of official events where we were kind of figureheads in this retro DBZ community, and Garrett worked out great, and that was an awesome fun time. The problem is that when you started to infringe on what other people's grift was, when that was going on, that's when you kind of started to make enemies at this place. And looking back now, it would be what you would consider harassment, like what some of the things that I ended up going through at Funimation. Other people were going through similar things. There was a real divide between certain groups of people there. If you go to like Glassdoor, you can kind of read some of the horror stories that were going on at the time, but it just went from kind of this dream job to being absolutely just hellacious. And I was in there. I loved anime, I loved Dragon Ball Z, and I was trying to make these changes for the better. I saw all this money being wasted on personal expenses, on bar tabs, on having mistresses and girlfriends come out to conventions. And as soon as I started making waves there, that's when things really went south for me. So I was eventually let go from Funimation, and it was quite a blow for me at the time, because this was kind of like the dream that I wanted to live, and it turned into a nightmare. And you know, I'm this young 20-something-year-old kid, and experiencing, you know, people actively like working against you, trying to get you let go. There were people that were really cool in that company, and they would be like, hey Josh, this person that you work with is sending this email out to everyone, basically detailing how they would like you to be fired and how they would like to take over your position and distribute it to some of their friends. And it was rough. Immediately after losing that job, I lost several friends who I just found out were just kind of there for the ride. And once you were persona non grata, including my girlfriend at the time, boom, I was gone. I was out. There was one particular voice actor there who I really, really liked his character in Dragon Ball Z, but I had committed some slight against him at some point. Within days after being fired, he sent me this really nasty Facebook message about how much he didn't like me and how I was a terrible person, and how, you know, he was glad that I was finally let go. And this was like really, really hurtful for me, especially because I thought these people were cool. I thought these people were my friends, and there were some good people there. I don't want to paint it as like everyone was terrible, because it was mostly like a handful of people. But just coming out of that, I was destroyed. I was devastated, just in a bad place mentally. I turned to drinking a lot. I just didn't care about myself. I ended up losing my apartment and having to move in with Garrett. And Garrett didn't even have space for me. Bless you for taking me in. But I ended up sleeping on his couch, doing nothing, asking my parents for money, selling whatever DBZ cards I had left just to make money. And I wasn't doing anything with that money except buying more booze and just being terrible, and not really having a lot going on. And so, you know, this was around the time where we were doing more and more events freelance. I had the shackles taken off me from Funimation, so I could be a little more involved without having an official presence. And I think one of the first things that Garrett did on the website was post his Broly deck. It was just a deck list that I don't think he put strategy or anything. I think it was just, here are the cards for it. And it got a lot of conversation, a lot of talking. And I was like, well, shoot, I got a lot of my decks. And I fancy myself as something of a writer. So why don't I take a turn and just start writing articles? And I have this Facebook page that I've done nothing with. I just took it and had a few thousand followers. What if I started putting out content on that? So that's kind of what started me out. Like it was an escape. It was like, life sucks, life is terrible. I was just making every bad decision, and I know the Hunter Burton Memorial is here for suicide prevention. That was great. I never considered self-harm, but I was indeed harming myself by just separating myself from my friends, from just getting drunk and drinking every night, just not caring about myself. I wasn't trying to improve my situation. I eventually just had to take like contracted and retail jobs to stay afloat. But as I was writing more and more for RetroDBZ, I was starting to get that positive attention again, where people really genuinely cared about the things that I was doing, and it really helped me out in a very difficult time for me. That was kind of my outlet, where I was getting this positive attention, where I was getting to try new things and experiment. I didn't have money, and I had to stay sober to write and be on a lot of these articles, and it really helped me out during a really terrible time. And thank you, brother, for doing all that for me.
So let's talk about like the virtual cards. You at that point in my life, I remember like we kind of experimented with the virtual cards, and there's a little bit of backlash from some fans who just wanted it to be pure. But I was like, we're going to be playing this forever. At that point, no one had any notion that the game would ever come back in any capacity. So the idea was just to kind of keep it fresh. And at that point in my life, I think I had already designed like 2,000 or 3,000 cards. So I kind of let you and some of the other guys design a lot of those cards. I would kind of say like, hey, let's just do some Dragon Ball stuff and whatnot. And if somebody wanted to make something a little too crazy, I might put a stamp on it. Like, no, you got to tone it down, things like that. But yeah, and then the audience really started to embrace those virtual cards, and it became something everybody was looking forward to. And as a way to preview the virtual cards, we started doing Twitch streams. We were live streaming the matches, and we would kind of test virtual cards on the stream. And at the time, I think we might have even started on Justin TV. I don't remember. I think we may have done 1 or 2 on Justin TV.
I know we did some of the stuff when we were doing stuff for Funimation. I think by the time it was ours, yeah, we were on Twitch. Some of those old videos are still around. I'm embarrassed by a few of them, so you might not be able to find a couple of them. But.
Yeah, but the thing about what blows my mind about that is, now you look at what people do, where they play D&D on the internet, and Magic's such a big streaming presence, and other games are really popular. At the time, like, they didn't even have a category on Twitch when we would try to stream a card game, because it was so video game focused. And I think we always just listed it as the Dragon Ball Z Game Boy game.
Mm-hmm.
And we would post in the Facebook group and stuff, and people would watch us, and everybody seemed to be really engaged by that. And we used that as a mechanism to kind of build up hype for the Gen Con tournaments. And then the Gen Con tournaments were very interesting to me, because after 2 or 3 years of doing those Gen Con tournaments, we got to a point where I'd be seeing somebody there who I never knew from the old game, didn't know who they were, and I'd ask them, and they'd be like, oh man, I just love playing old dead card games, and this card game is crazy, and I'm a big fan of Dragon Ball Z. And at some point, it was probably 30 or 40% of the people playing in those tournaments never played the original game, or they were too young to have been able to play in the big tournaments for the original game. So I always found that interesting. And then one of the aspects from that community, since we allow proxies and stuff, the fan base really took on making custom cards. Mm-hmm. That was one of my favorite things about the old kind of pre-Panini era of Z, was just the custom cards that people were making, just the coolest things. I remember one year as a kid, I think he was playing Saiyan Broly, but his entire deck was Gundam characters. He changed all the artwork and all the cards to Gundam. I think Brewster was a big fan of doing that too. He would change he played Future Gohan a lot, and he changed all the artwork on all of his cards to be real centric towards Future Gohan. I just thought that type of creativity and expression was really unique to what we were doing. at the time. It allowed everybody to really individualize and get a little bit more like personal with what the decks they were playing and things like that.
Yeah, I know, like, one of the things we really wanted to put an emphasis on was towards the end of the life cycle of the game, you just had a lot of kind of really stale, like, Dragon Ball decks or whatever, and there was just different variations of that. It's like, it's this Dragon Ball deck, but it's black. It's this Dragon Ball deck, but it's orange. It's this Dragon Ball deck, but it's colorless. And we wanted to kind of diversify and show, like, there's actually other archetypes here. So we would kind of have an internal rule where it's like, we're not going to make like these really cheap decks that are kind of boring to watch unless it has some weird gimmick that we can do. We wanted to make decks that we hadn't seen it before, like Kid Buu. Like, you would never play Kid Buu in a tournament at all. There were also a lot of kind of what I would call unfinished archetypes. So, like, for instance, there was a lot of cards that were like, if your opponent is villain or Majin. Well, that was super incredibly rare. You would never run into that, but these cards had interesting effects. So what if there was some way that you could use them against characters that were not villain or Majin, but you got all the effects? So we would kind of look for areas in the game where it's like, how could we make one or two cards that would flesh out this archetype and suddenly take all of these dead cards that had interesting effects but no one used and make them more playable? And so that's when we kind of started just making stuff like the Videl that used all of those cards, and suddenly Videl's a very playable personality. Tien was another one where it's like there were kind of like Tien flight archetypes and multiform archetypes, but they were just like pieces that didn't really fit together, and we would try to pull them together with that. There was very much a disparity with a lot of the characters with whether they would have a level 3, a level 4, or a level 5, so we started making cards that it's like, let's say you want to make an anger deck and you didn't want to play one of the 4 characters that had level 5s. We started making cards and personalities that you could actually win through most powerful personality with just your level 4, in the same way that you would win in the Panini game where you're at level 4 and have 5 anger and win that way. And we just saw like a lot of diversification after doing that, where we could make videos. Like, one of our most popular videos ever was like, Kid Trunks 10-card hand destroys Majin Buu. You would never see that in a tournament environment, but with us kind of making our fun cards and our fun decks, we were showing that off, and people were just like, wow, that looks like a lot of fun. So no longer were we building decks to win $1,000 tournaments. We were building decks to be like, can we make this? Can it work? Can it do something funny and awesome? Sometimes we get really far along and it's like, oh no, it's missing like 1 or 2 pieces to make it work, and then we would just be like, here's a new virtual card, and it would take off.
A lot of that was we would just pick random decks to play on the stream, and I can remember like we would just make like 10 decks and just roll them, and then we'd be like, let's make decks that no one's ever built before, things like that, and we did real interesting things. There was just some flavor stuff that I always wanted in the game that never was there, so we made a Cell that was an android, so you got to run him in an android deck, and it just kind of was working on the flavor. And one of the coolest things was doing the characters from like Dragon Ball. So like Baba, we ended up, as far as all the virtual cards go, Baba was the one that I think we actually may have made too powerful. We ended up having the Rainer back. So I think one of our tournaments for Gen Con, like, we refer to them as Team Baba, but they're all like the St. Louis guys. And I think all 4 of them showed up and ran Baba, and then like 3 of them made it into the top 8. And I think that was the only time we really ever had more, like, the same character duplicated in the top 8. So we had to reel that one back a little bit. But it was just fun to make all like the Dragon Ball characters.
Yeah, you know, like, I was a big fan of the property. When I first played the game, I could care less about Dragon Ball. I was like, I'd rather watch Sailor Moon or something. But I really grew to love it. And yeah, me and him would watch Dragon Ball together when we were living together. We got all the DVDs, and we'd never watched it from start to finish. So we just went through it, and we're like, man, this is awesome. How come there's no cards with this? So we wanted to kind of put that flavor in more. Yeah, I brought up the androids, where it's like, Cell could never use android cards, or if you wanted to make an android ally deck, there's only like 2 or 3 actual usable androids for an ally deck. The rest are just all have constant combat powers, which don't work the same way in the Score game as they do in the Panini game. So it was just like, well, now these decks kind of function a little better, and we had a great time. Yeah, Baba, I admit, was probably the biggest mistake that we made, and I wanted to do cute, fun things, and it was a little hubris on my part, but I think we were able to get a few others that really took off and made people excited for the game.
Yeah, one of my favorite things from that time was because we were going to Gen Con every year and doing the tournaments, and it was kind of one of the holdovers from your Funimation days, was we actually just ran a fan Dragon Ball panel at Gen Con that got very popular. It was always like standing room only in that panel, and this is before like Super was ever like an idea that the show would ever come back in any capacity. So we would just go in there and kind of just shoot from the cuff and talk like everybody. Let's just talk about our love of Dragon Ball, the property in general, and that was a lot of fun. I can remember we did like competition one time to see who could do the best like fusion dance and who could do the best Ginyu poses and things like that. And we would occasionally give away like DVDs or prizes. And I remember also during that time, a lot of the older like my cohorts at Score from the time, they still had some like Score product that they had, and everybody kind of took a little bit of it home with them in their portfolios and collections. And a lot of people donated a bunch. I remember Will Harper donated a bunch of old Score boxes, sealed boxes to us. At the time, back then they weren't what they were now as far as collectability, but we gave those out for tournament prize. I think I gave those out for tournament prizes for 2 or 3 years, the boxes that he gave us. And then we were most of us were a little bit younger during the time, and Gen Con was much more of a, like we'd go and socialize because it's not like a serious tournament. We'd be super competitive, but that's where the whole idea of the guy who got 9th place came around. So there's like 3 or 4 years that the 9th place guy, the guy on the bubble, which is always the worst spot to be in, I always brought a bottle of Grey Goose with me, and I would give the guy Grey Goose, whoever came in 9th place. And one of the people who won one year messaged me like years later, saying that he had kept that bottle for like 3 years, and that he met this girl and they drank it that night, and then like fast forward a couple years later, they're like engaged and married and stuff now.
Let's take credit for that.
yeah. So I always thought that kind of like community stuff was really, really neat. And Orange Hat Guy was real big in that scene and stuff too. Like some of those players, they were just fun to be around. And some of the guys are not as active in the community anymore. It's more geared towards the modern kind of like Panini stuff and whatnot. But I do see the old kind of like people are getting back into the Score stuff more, and they're seeing people talk about retro stuff. There's actually a group that I play in all the time on Discord where they play with the old cards. They don't play with any of the new stuff. They play with just the old Score cards, and it's fun to get into that group and play.
Yeah, I think part of it is, like a lot of the Score stuff, they would make cards, and the cards kind of wouldn't really fit anywhere. They would just be like attack +3 and then have some effect, and it might not really work in one deck, but then you introduce 1 or 2 other cards and suddenly, that's awesome, and you can mix and match it. With the Panini stuff, while I prefer the structure a little better, where it's like they make a card and this card clearly goes in this particular deck and this particular archetype, I think that's what a lot of people like about the retro game, where it's just like, no, you can flip that card out and put this card in, and it doesn't even make sense, but it'll have like a wild effect and it'll just look fun. You could use named cards. I think just the chaos of it, where you never knew what someone was just gonna pull out. You could have 2 people make the same deck with the same personality and the same mastery, and they would come out completely, utterly different.
Yeah, one of the things too we did with retro, and I think that's one of the reasons why it started picking up people that never played the old game. The rules in the old game were very indicative of the time, and we kind of tinkered with a little bit of them to modernize it. Like we got rid of the double power rule and the hero and villains rule where you get to go first. That way it's just more of a straight dice roll. So I felt sometimes that those rules were taken advantage of. You'd run like a weaker character like Roshi just to be able to go first all the time. And I felt as though like doing that, it may suddenly, now you could play Boo and Kid Boo and some of these super strong characters and just not always have to go second, even though we did even have to amend that because we wanted to get into like the god characters and Janemba and stuff like that. And Boo was becoming very strong in later years of retro because we had put such an emphasis on trying to be more like beatdown oriented. So we had to kind of implement a new version of the double power rule. We refer to it as the overpower rule, where if your character's starting power level was like in the D bracket, and at that time it was only Boo who was affected by it. So we made Janemba, and we were gonna make Beerus and whatnot, But by that time we were rolling into that, the Panini game was getting ready to come out, and everybody's focus was starting to shift there. Like at that point, I was working on the development team to help Panini bring that game back, so I wasn't able to really do some of the retro stuff. But we continued doing a few of the virtual cards even after Panini had come out, but they were real silly things. Like, and I actually really liked that last batch. I was looking at them yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
That last batch of virtual cards, because it was like from the Shonen Jump special. I don't know whose idea it was. It had to have been yours or Brewster's or somebody's.
I think we wanted to do something like Halloween themed or whatever.
Yeah,
because it was like, oh, this is cool.
Because it was all like the Dragon Ball characters done by the predominant Shonen Jump artist at the time. So there was Goku, like Kid Goku dressed as Naruto, done by the Naruto artist. Then there was like Pirate Vegeta, which is a pretty good looking picture, and it's like a Pirate Vegeta on there. And then there was a Piccolo was the other one. I don't remember what.
I think that was from the One Piece mashup. So Piccolo was supposed to be like a mashup of Zoro and
Yeah,
Piccolo.
I think that's right. He had swords on the picture and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was super fun, and to look at that.
Yeah. Around that time, unfortunately, because of my relationship with Funimation, I was actually, much to my disappointment, left out of all of the Panini fun. So I was kind of on the sidelines. I did a few retro articles, but I also wanted to, give the new game a chance. I was friends with everyone who was on that design team, and I thought, it was fun while it lasted and it served a purpose, but now there's a new game, and that's obviously where all the attention was. So I felt that was kind of a good time to end, or at least put a pause on the retro cards. Maybe in the future we would pick them up again. But we transitioned a little bit into doing some of the Panini stuff. At that point, my heart just kind of wasn't in it at the time, and I started moving on to other things. So I unfortunately was not super involved in that community, but because we already had retro established and that kind of became the preeminent place to talk about the game, I maintained it for posterity's sake. And so in my personal life at that time, I was like, all right, snapping out of my depression, snapping out of my anxiety a little bit, where it's like, I want more than living on a couch. I want more than just working paycheck to paycheck at retail jobs. So I started putting together all of the stuff that I did for RetroDBZ and applying for social media jobs, and I found one, and they were looking for someone with entertainment experience and working with fandoms and influencers, and I was like, well, I not only had I done all that, I had something to show for it and personality. So I went and applied for this job, and I didn't know who the client was, but they loved all my stuff. I showed them Dragon Ball Z and RetroDBZ. That was my portfolio, and they loved it. And at that point, they decided to reveal who the client was, and the client was The Walking Dead. It was to run the Twitter for the AMC show, which at the time was the #1 cable show on TV. And I was like, whoa, that's really cool. And they ended up offering me the job based on all of the retro stuff that I had done, some of the Panini trading cards that I had written, just my connection to the fandom, because it would also be working on like Kevin Smith's Comic Book Men, which I'd worked with Kevin Smith in the past, so I was like, that was a natural fit. I suddenly was the guy tweeting out for Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and Mad Men, all these really popular shows, and it's all thanks to what I was doing on RetroDBZ, and it just gave me a lot of confidence after I started working on that, and just the difference of working in a different environment, in a different studio that was like a complete 180 from Funimation. Suddenly I was working with people who wanted to see me succeed. I was working with people who it was in their best interest, where it's like, you don't know how to do something, let's train you how to do it. Let's get you experience on doing that. Just coworkers that generally cared about my well-being, and it was a great feeling. It was awesome, and that's kind of my redemption arc there, where I got to work on one of the most popular shows of TV at the time, tweeting out. I was the guy, if you were tweeting at us when they had that big cliffhanger with Negan killing people, like, that was me getting to reveal all of that cool stuff online. And eventually I got to go on and work for other stuff. I did some stuff with the Lego games. I eventually got to work with Sony PlayStation, working on some of their first party titles, and it's just been an amazing ride for me, and I owe a lot of it to what I was doing for RetroDBZ. If I hadn't done that, if I had just kind of given up and wallowed in my own self-defeat, I would have had nothing to show, and I would not have stood out. So for that, Retro was a very important part of my life, for both professionally and personally. It was just my redemption, and what I used to climb out of the hole I was in and just be in a better stage of life, and in a more positive stage of life. So thank you, Retro, for all that.
Yeah, that really ties back to just kind of like, in addition to the history of the Dragon Ball Z card game and the kind of celebration of all the different versions of the game, what we're doing here is showing that it is okay to talk about stuff. It's, you know, we're all gamers, and when you look at like suicide, it's one of the leading causes of death amongst men. And in today's world and times now, a lot of us are not getting to go out and play in the tournaments like we used to. I know a lot of people really look forward to going to be able to play in like the FanZ tournaments and stuff like that, and that this year was not going to happen. So hopefully this stream and as these videos are released out on YouTube and stuff later on, that people will watch these and be able to congregate around them and feel as though it's okay to talk about how you're feeling and stuff, and just realize you're not alone. You're part of this community. I mean, this community's been around for 12 years at this point. Many of us, this is where the majority of my friends come from this community. When I was a player, all my coworkers at Score, my closest friends today, and then all the people from Retro. It's just a pretty outstanding, and to see what it is and that it's still around. You know, it's just crazy to me that it's still around now. And there's like 3,500 members of the group. I remember when we got like 200 and we thought it was the coolest thing ever. Like, we couldn't believe there was 200 people that cared to even join and talk about it. Now there's 3,500 people in the thing. There's over 3,000 people that follow the Facebook page. Even though we don't do a lot of stuff on the site as much as we used to, as far as content and stuff, just because we're all really busy in our normal day-to-day lives, the site still gets a lot of traffic, and people use it to reference the old cards all the time. People go there to look at the rule books. It has a very, like, the legacy of what it is. It's very enduring, and hopefully it keeps on building and just keeps going, and see where, you know, I'm excited to see where it's going to be in another 10 years.
Oh, I was so excited when like Angry Joe like replied to us or whatever from the Angry Joe show, and I was like, yeah, we got an actual influencer to respond to us. That's really awesome. But yeah, like what Garrett's saying, you know, I moved around a lot as a kid, so, you know, I meet people who are like, well, I've known this person since second grade, we've been lifelong friends. There's no one like that for me. It's like, I think the farthest I can go back is maybe 6th grade, and that's around the time where I started playing like card games, and those are the people who have been most consistent in my life, who've stuck around the most. And I tell people, you know, the people you know are 100 times more interesting than some of these people you might idolize on TV that you see, like the voice actors and the actors, and don't look to them for like, you know, solace or respect. Turn to your friends, turn to your buddies. They'll want to hear you. They'll be there for you. I guarantee you, after this, if you call a friend that you haven't talked to in a while, as long as they're not an ex, they'll be happy to get your phone call and be like, hey man, I haven't heard from you for whatever. You don't need a reason to call them. I'm giving you permission now. Just look in your phone, look for someone you haven't talked to in a while, and just remember, it's like, hey, I remember all the good times there. Maybe they really need to hear from you. Maybe you really need to hear from them.
Yeah, so we're going to take a little break here because we need to get ready for what will be the rest of our programming. So we're going to go ahead and put the donation link for the Hunter Burton Memorial Foundation into the chat, just so that people know where to go if they want to donate any money towards the cause, or if they want to go there and look at some more stuff from the cause. But the first live guest that we're going to be talking to is Aaron Giddings. He worked at Score Entertainment. Many of you know him. He worked on PanZ also, but he is the main guy and driving force behind the Hunter Burton Memorial. You may have seen some of the Hunter Burton stuff in some of the posts we were talking about earlier. He's going to come on, tell us everything that charity is about, and what they do, and the whole gaming to prevent suicide, gaming to bring awareness to suicide. And we're going to bring them on, and probably get a little bit of heavy for a little bit, but then after that, we're going to talk to Joey DiCarlo. Everybody loves Joey. He's one of the most beloved members of the community, and we're going to do our first of 2 live sessions with Joey. We're going to preview some new fan cards for the upcoming sets. And then after that, we have a pre-recorded interview with Ake, the designer, one of the mastermind kind of behind PanZ, and he worked on Bleach at Score, and then was a world champion for the original Dragon Ball Z game. And then we're also going to talk live with Chippy, the guy everybody remembers from when they were a young kid, because he wore those Mouseketeer hats at the tournaments and stuff like that. Yeah, he always had the megaphone and stuff like that. We're going to talk to him live. We're going to talk a little bit about Score and things like that. But he was the main designer on a lot of the GT sets, and the GT sets were pretty much forgotten by the players. Like, we didn't ever really acknowledge them when we were doing retro stuff. We weren't a huge fan of them. But they're somewhat in this crazy space right now, the insane collectible world, and they're super popular sets amongst collectors. So he and I, we're going to go into a deep dive with him on some of that stuff. And then after that, we have a pre-recorded interview with Aaron and Deanna Cass. Many of you probably have never heard from Deanna. She was not really a part of the fandom after the company went away. So she was the like head of marketing for a lot of the later Score years, and it's real interesting to hear her take on it, because unlike the rest of us, we were all gamers. You can understand how we would end up working at a gaming company. She did not work at a gaming company, and it's a real interesting conversation to see how that was, like, what she learned, and the things now going forward, like 17 years, what she takes away from that experience. Then after that, we're going to go into another section with Joey, and we're going to talk about more virtual cards and stuff, and we'll probably take some questions from the chat. So if you guys have questions in the chat, you can do that there. And then after that, we're going to roll into a really good interview that was with Richie Williams, and we talk a lot about the kind of like early competitive tournament environments of the game, like Saiyan through Android Saga, like those eras, plus some other stuff talking about the Panini Z, and then we even talk a little bit, there's some UU talk coming on and the rest of this stuff too for the guys who love Yu Hakusho and whatnot. This there's a lot of other Score property love being given to this. So on that note, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be back on at 5 o'clock with Aaron Giddings to talk about the Hunter Burton Memorial.
I hope everybody enjoyed that segment. I really enjoyed that segment. It allowed me to talk a lot about the history of the site and kind of my thought process of what I was thinking of the time, now that I think back on it 12 years ago to the year 2008, why I wanted to make it. So based on how successful this initial live stream was in the Virtual Retro-Spective, a number of other employees and coworkers of mine, including predominant players from all the different eras of the game, have kind of come to me afterwards because maybe the scheduling, there were some people I reached out to, the scheduling just wasn't going to work for the day we were doing it, and they weren't able to do any of the pre-recorded stuff. So it looks like we're going to be doing a few more of these kind of interview retrospective things coming out over the next couple of months. We probably won't do another live stream unless there's just an overwhelming demand for one. But I think I'm going to go with just like the hour-long pieces of content, continuing out kind of the retrospective and continuing to bring awareness to the cause, to gaming to prevent suicide and the HBMO. So hopefully everybody enjoyed that. I hope everybody is looking forward to the next couple of interviews that were available on the live stream. If anybody wants to watch the live stream in its entirety, it is available on the video on demand on my Twitch channel, which I will post in the link below us in the description. And it has like all the chat transcripts and stuff like that, so you can kind of relive what was going on as we were doing it. So hopefully everybody enjoys the rest of the content and has a great day.